Hi everyone, this is the final video in our GCSE Business Exam Technique series. This is about the 12 marker, the big scary 12 marker, the big evaluate question. The positive is there's only one of them on the paper, and it also signals the end of the paper as well, which is always nice to know you're coming to the end. So there is one 12-mark question, and it is the last question on the paper. So we're going to talk about the structure, we're going to talk about the assessment objectives that you need to show when you're answering this question, and we're going to show you a model answer as well, or a sample answer from a student that I've written up, so we can have a look at kind of how you might hit those criteria. So these questions assess you on all four of your assessment objectives: knowledge, application, analysis, and evaluation. If you haven't seen, if you're not sure what those assessment objectives are and you haven't seen the other videos in this series, I would recommend going back and watching them. They're not too long, and I guarantee that it will be helpful for you when it comes to your exams. Now for this one, the structure is a peculiar one because there is an optional additional paragraph, but we would recommend being really cautious about using it. So let's have a look at what this question is at the bottom, and then we'll talk about how the structure would look. So this one is, and they always start with evaluate. Evaluate whether crowdfunding is an effective source of finance for good and proper tea. They always have this little bit at the end as well. You should use the information provided as well as your knowledge of business. It's a fairly generic statement there. The main part of the question is that first bit. So evaluating whether crowdfunding is an effective source of finance. So structure-wise, we are going to talk about the positive, the negative. Those are going to be our first two paragraphs. The alternative, we're going to touch on that in a second. And then the conclusion, is it positive or negative? To some degree, this is a similar structure to a 9 marker, except for you don't have two options. You've got one option. But in terms of those main 3 paragraphs on this structure here, paragraph 1, 2, and 4, those are the most important bits. And we'll talk about what that would look like for this question, because positive, negative, well, the question is whether crowdfunding is effective. So what is positive, what is negative? We'll talk about that. But the key thing here is that alternative paragraph. You should only do the alternative paragraph if you've got enough time to do one without running out of time. Like, you absolutely should prioritize the conclusion over the alternative. So only do it if you've got enough time, and only do it if you've got a good point. Don't do it if you haven't got a good point. If you're not confident with it, you're better off not bothering than doing a bad one. So usually what I would say is only students looking for a grade 8 or a 9 should really attempt this alternative. Mike, do you want to talk about kind of why sometimes the alternative can be a hindrance rather than a help?
I'll go one step further and say only grade 9 and safe grade 9 should really attempt to use an alternative paragraph. You have to be careful, because if you're in a rush and you think, oh, my teacher said I've got to stick an alternative in, you write a 3-line quick alternative that's not very good, not really got much key use of key terms, and you've also got application missing. You're then going to start looking to drop marks on application. Because it's not going to be throughout, is it? So you're going to go down to maybe, top of level 2, low level 3 instead of top of level 3 if it's great in all the other paragraphs. And it's going to call into your question your knowledge and understanding to an extent if you then give a really ropey alternative paragraph. So sometimes, as they say, less is more. I would say apart from 2 students in my class, they will write it as a 9 marker.
Yeah. So let's talk about how this would look then, structure-wise, because as we mentioned, positive, negative, how do we do positive, negative on a question where it says evaluate whether crowdfunding is an effective source of finance? So what you would do is your first paragraph would be saying crowdfunding is effective, and obviously then going into your links about why crowdfunding would be effective for that business. For the negative, you would say why it's not effective. So why crowdfunding, like the limitations of crowdfunding specific to that business. For the alternative, if you're doing one, you would suggest potentially an alternative source of finance that may be effective. And then in conclusion, crowdfunding is either effective or not effective. You can answer either way as long as you justify it correctly. We'll talk about the justification for that conclusion as well. So, Mike, we've touched on this already in the 9 marker, but for the benefit of anyone who maybe is worried about the 12 marker, who hasn't watched the 9 mark section, would you just talk us through again what a good conclusion looks like?
Yeah, sure. So you've got to make your conclusion fairly quickly, because time is usually short in the 9s and the 12s. So the first thing you need to do in your very first line, just make it really clear what option you have decided upon and give the main reason. If you can, try and make it a market-based or a situation-based reason rather of the business, rather than simple repetition of a bit of theory. So you'd say, I think crowdfunding is particularly useful for this business, mainly because they're in the IT sector where it works really well with their target demographic of blah 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 blah. If you hadn't already said all that. Yeah. So, and then finally, what you're looking to do is a success depends on point. Every conclusion, 9 and 12, must have this, and you need to look at your disadvantage paragraph, and you need to give a suggestion of how you would minimize that negative. So, if we think back to the 9 mark video where we had last course patisserie and they were hiring new staff, and it could be very expensive because the wage rates are very high due to inflation, then you might want to say how you would reduce the need to pay such high wages, such as providing a range of non-financial methods as well, such as, you could give some really good applied examples. And then obviously in a 12, if you want to stretch that a little bit further to make sure you really do nail the 12 out of 12 and not get the 11 out of 12, you might want to look at doing a short-term versus long-term point. And generally they will contrast. So usually it might be very high costs and teething problems in the short term for the long-term gain. That is usually the way. Or it could be that you get a short-term benefit, but you get a long-term downside. You maybe limited growth, for example, by cutting back, by doing maybe a bit of delayering, for example. So, that usually you want to show contrast. You don't really want to say it's great in the short term, it's great in the long term. Away we go.
Okay, so let's talk through the criteria for each of these assessment objectives. Now, it's also worth bearing in mind that this is the only question on the paper that assesses all 4 assessment objectives. So knowledge and understanding, application, analysis, and evaluation are assessed here. So how would you get your marks? How do you hopefully get level 3 for each of these criteria? For knowledge and understanding, it's going to be about how good your points are and how much you're demonstrating your knowledge of the course through key terminology. So level 1, limited knowledge shown in the points you've made. Level 2, mostly accurate, knowledge shown in the points you've made. Level 3, accurate, strong knowledge shown in the points you've made, and you're going to see confident use of key terminology there. For application, limited use of the extract and case study quotes for level 1, so maybe fairly superficial points that aren't really linked very specifically to the business in the question. For level 2, good use of the case study but perhaps inconsistent, and so this could be maybe not in every paragraph. So this kind of links back to what Mike was saying earlier about if you're trying to do an alternative paragraph, if you don't apply that effectively, even if you're level 3 everywhere else, if you're not in that alternative paragraph, you can bump yourself back down to level 2 by missing it out there. For level 3, good use of the extract, relevant quotes used in every paragraph, including the conclusion. For analysis, it's the same as all of our other analysis questions. Hopefully we're fairly familiar with that by now. 1 link for level 1, 2 to 4 links for level 2, 5 or more links for level 3 analysis. That's going to be, again, using our BLT, using whatever connectives you're using, whatever structure your teacher uses, to make sure that you demonstrate that not only do you have good points, but you're able to explain the cause and effect of these things on the business as well. Then for evaluation, a lack of balance in the paragraphs, an ineffective conclusion, that's probably going to get you level 1. Level 2, we want balanced paragraphs, so we want effectively that we talked about here, why it is effective, why it isn't effective. And a conclusion with some justification, but probably a limited justification. And then for level 3, this is where we get our alternative come in, balanced paragraphs and alternative options suggested, and then a good conclusion, and it depends on a short or long term. So I think, is that the kind of key message then, Mike, that if you don't have that alternative, you probably won't get a level 3 evaluation, but that's for the most part where that's the only bit you'd kind of miss out on?
I would say you'll get level 3 evaluation, but maybe it'll just be low level 3 evaluation. Yeah. Teachers and examiners should try to give levels on your work, for example, or students' work, and they should put maybe L3 for evaluation, but then L or H for high. It's not as simple as even just getting in a level. Is it high in the level, low in the level? Because we talked about analysis, didn't we, with 5+ links. Yeah. So 5 links would be, in my opinion, low level 3, 6+ is high level 3.
Yeah.
And we could also call into question the quality of the links and things. But yeah, basically that.
So let's have a look at an answer then. So this is the question that we're going to have a look at, and this is the student answer we've got. So evaluate whether crowdfunding is an effective source of finance for good and proper tea. And obviously, as we mentioned there, this is a sample answer, so this is going to include an alternative paragraph, but we've made it really, really clear you don't do that unless you've got a really, really good one and you're aiming for you're aiming for 12 out of 12 basically. So we've got our crowdfunding is effective. We've got our however crowdfunding is not effective. That's our main kind of positive and negative. And then we've got an alternative source of finance that could be effective. Worth specifying again, I feel like we've probably stressed this enough, Mike, but don't do the alternative unless you've got a good one, you're aiming for high. And then finally, we've got our conclusion. So Mike, do you want to talk us through how they got the marks, or how many marks they got on this answer and where they've demonstrated their
Right,
skills?
let's have a look. So crowdfunding is an effective source of finance as it reduces overall costs. Reduces, minimises overall costs, I'd agree. This is because money raised from crowdfunding websites such as Kickstarter and Crowdcube, never heard that one, it doesn't have to be paid back. Okay, so we've got analysis and we've got a bit of application in there with the crowd funding websites being named, which is good. I would say that kind of stuff is level 2 on its own, mentioning Kickstarter, Crowdcube, application-wise. So the student goes on, this leads to the owner of the business, Emily, being able to keep more of the profit. Okay, yeah, true. It's a fairly weak analysis chain, but okay. Therefore, in addition to crowdfunding, Emily has more retained profit to use as she wanted to expand the business. Okay, the student could have explained this slightly better, but I get the general gist. She wants to expand the business. If they took a loan out, there'd be lots of interest to be paid on the loan. That would hamper future growth. That's what the student's trying to get across. I think they just about have got it across well enough. So we've got 1, 2, 3 links in there. We've got 2 bits of application. It's a good start. It's a good start. We need some strong analysis chains, though, to make me want to go through level 3 on there. Fairly weak chains. However, crowdfunding is not an effective source of finance for good and proper tea, as it could increase costs short term. Okay, this is because each of the 372 individual Kickstarter backers application and the Crowdcube backers will likely require a reward for their investment. Okay, I mean, being picky, I'd prefer the students to have said pledge rather than investment, but I get the idea. So they're going to have to give maybe a discount on the goods. It might be they have to send out some personalized thank you cards or whatever it could be. It's all going to cost the business time and money. So the student goes on. This could lead to Emily either sharing profits or providing high quality tea as a reward. Okay, so maybe taking a hit on profit margins by giving away some of the tea free. As a reward, maybe a taster or something, I guess. So therefore, this would reduce the company's profit. Yeah, maybe in the short term. Let's see if they do that in the conclusion. So if we look in this alternative paragraph, so this best be good as they've done an alternative paragraph. So the student says an alternative source of finance that could be effective is venture capital. Okay, that's a point. This is because Emily could attract investment from an expert in the high quality tea industry. Okay, I think the student's hoping a little bit here, but maybe, who knows. This could lead to Emily having support with key decisions and therefore reduced risk of failure. Oh, I like this, not enough students use that. As she continues to want to expand the business. Okay, so I'm getting the idea that expansion is risky and you need someone, that's more experienced to help you along. Okay, I'd say that's a perfectly good point. I don't necessarily like that students always think all venture capitalists want to, get their hands dirty and want to help too much, but at GCSE, that's fine. Really good evaluation. I like it. Let's look at the conclusion. So in conclusion, crowdfunding is effective as it has allowed Emily to raise £140,000 on Crowdcube and money on Kickstarter without interest. Okay, I would have heard the word capital instead of money, but splitting hairs maybe. But we've got the point in there without interest. That's the main thing. And we've got application in there, so we're going to be level 3 for application because we've got application everywhere. It depends, success depends on how much support Emily needs from experts in the running of the business, as it has so far expanded and has been very successful. So in a 9, you would look success depends on and look at your disadvantage. But the student has done an alternative, so it's viable to look at the alternative instead of the disadvantage. And they've decided that only you don't know. The student doesn't know how much Emily needs an expert at the helm. She's done well so far, so maybe that's a precedent that she can carry on doing well, which is logical, especially at GCSE level. So if we then start looking at giving this levels, the student clearly understands crowdfunding, apart from the fact that they've said investment rather than pledge and things like that. It's solid enough at GCSE for level 3 knowledge. Application is throughout. I like it. Clearly writing about this good and proper tea and not, a random business that could be crowdfunding. So it's everywhere. I would say it's level 3. Analysis, we've got enough chains. We've got 6 chains. The chains are a little bit weak. Maybe erring on the side of caution at low level 3 for analysis. Evaluation, we've got a great alternative. We've got a really good however. We've got a really good conclusion. You can't go anywhere other than level 3 for evaluation. So if we look at that, everything's top level 3 apart from analysis, which means I would probably go 11 out of 12.
Yeah, it also is lacking a short and long term kind of consideration in the conclusion. But like you say, of course, that's the difference. You look at the difference between 10, 11 and 12, there's a kind of fine margins. But yeah, you're right. I think some of the analysis just lacks a little bit specific, doesn't it? So talking about sharing profits is a little bit clumsy. Like, it could be clear about what that's going to mean. There's a little bit of repetition. And like you mentioned about sort of the key terminology, the use of the word pledge rather than investment and what have you as well. So yeah, it's a fairly solid answer. But again, the key thing with this is just trying to get an idea of those key skills, Obviously, every student would love to get 12 out of 12, 10 out of 12. But if you're getting, 8, 9 on a question like this, you've done pretty well. You're likely to have a fairly solid answer, especially considering this is the last question on the paper. So picking up those key points about making sure you've got balance with your however, making sure you've got the case study in every single paragraph, and making sure your conclusion's well structured. Those kind of key parts there are the things to be aiming at. And obviously, we want to make sure students are aiming high. And so trying to kind of show you an example of an answer that's at a pretty good standard, but also has a few little areas of improvement as well. And hopefully you could spot those as you went through, or you understand the explanation when it's being given. So that's the last of this series of videos. Hopefully this has helped you get a bit of an idea about how to put together exam answers for the GCSE business paper. The best bit of advice I could give you is, once you know your structure, do as many practice questions as possible. And the more practice you get of writing in these structures and getting balance and getting the case study and using case studies and reading case studies, the easier it's going to be to do it on the day, especially considering timing wise, it is quite tricky. It is quite tight. Yes, you have an hour and 45 minutes, but you'll be working pretty hard for those 1 hour and 45 minutes. And so the more automatic you can make that process, the easier you're going to find that in the end. And so yeah, thanks Mike for helping go through all of these answers and giving us some expertise on what kind of makes level 3 answers. And hopefully this will help students get prepared. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and we'll jump on every so often and see if we can give you a little bit of help. Thank you very much.